congratulations, Brendan. Thanks for taking this call from Radio Italia Uno Adelaide. And again, congratulations on the Walkley's Award.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. I was very successful this year. I have won the Nikon-Walkley Press Photographer of the Year 2022. So it's a great honour, actually, a great honour. I'm really chuffed.
Yes, and you were saying we were having a conversation earlier today that you have had quite a long career in photographic journalism, and in fact, I've seen a video of you talking about your time with Fairfax. So maybe let's have a quick overview of your career as a journalist.
Oh, it's been around about 33 years, I believe. I started off in the community newspapers. I'm a Liverpool boy, born in the western suburbs of Sydney, and got myself a cadetship, an old school journalistic cadetship where I had to study and work day to day, Monday to Friday, sometimes Saturdays, at the local paper, the Champion newspaper, the local paper, which was proud and humble beginnings. I was then approached by John Fairfax and Son, so the Sydney Morning Herald, where I was given full-time employment, and I worked there basically around about for 27 years. And I eventually became the chief photographer there, and covering your day-to-day news, disasters, lots of crime, features work, Olympic Games, World Cup soccer qualifications, portraiture, you name it. I was at the cutting edge, really, of frontline photography, and I loved it. I then left. During the Sydney Morning Herald, I was approached by News Limited, and I worked at the Daily Telegraph for 4 years. Learned a lot of different skills there. It's a different type of newspaper. It was tabloid, coming from a broadsheet, then to tabloid, whole different, approach, really.
Okay, so what's the difference then?
Oh, the difference of clearly, well, from a photographer's point of view, when you're shooting for a large format newspaper, a broadsheet in the old days, everything is horizontal. The pictures are horizontal, and you have plenty of room to play with. So you can be really creative using, the rule of thirds when you compose a picture or you structure a photograph. You have to use different lenses, completely different lenses. When you're working for a tabloid, it's predominantly your pictures are shown vertically. So they are different focal lengths, and you have to pull the picture in, basically, compress the image so that it can work in a smaller space. They are the fundamental difference. But, Fairfax and News Limited were different beasts back in the day, and they would approach stories differently. Fairfax was a little bit more highbrow in the day, and a lot of educated people read their broadsheets. Whereas with Telegraph, it was your meat and potatoes. It was your working class people out in the burbs, in the suburbs, and they would read the paper on the bus, going on the train, going to work. It was easy to read, a lot of sport. So I did a lot of sport. Hence, I got to go to Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games. There are many different nuances that separate the papers. But the one thing is they constantly did news, and my background and my history has been, I've been a news photographer. Yes.
Well, actually, looking at your site, there was a beautiful photo of a racehorse, and at first you couldn't tell. There is some sort of movement, I guess, on the body. And it turns out it's just shampoo. It's just the soap suds, but it has a wonderful effect at a distance. At one stage, I thought it might be an Aboriginal painting on the top painting.
Yeah, I actually had to go down and photograph racehorses many times. When I worked for Associated Press of Australia, AAP, I did a lot of racing photography, and I used to go down to the racetrack early mornings, and jockeys train, they hop on the horse, they go out, they do a couple of laps, and they come in, and you talk to the trainers, and then the horses go off and have a wash. And I notice, and I always notice, and I see beautiful shapes. So you had this dark horse with these beautiful swirls of soap on its body. It looked almost sculpture. it's like a sculpture to me.
Indeed,
So,
yes.
and photography, I being of Italian descent, I'm emotional. I'm an emotional photographer. And so I look for the emotion in the image rather than the compositional value or the structure of the image. We construct pictures. Painters compose paintings, and it comes together by different layers of paint. We look at images and it's a structure, it's shape.
Mm-hmm.
And then the end result is the compositional value of that shape. That horse represented beauty. And as I said, I felt like it was a sculpture when I was shooting it.
Yes, interesting. As you're talking, it reminds me of another interview I did a few years ago with a photographer of Italian background. Actually, he probably was Italian, Canadian. He was awarded some Australian awards, and he was talking about how you can tell a story even when, I don't know, from an accident scene, and knowing how to take photos to give a story. And you're already starting to explain that, and then you've brought in the artistic element and the emotional element when talking about the image of a horse.
Correct. When you're shooting news, there are snatch and grab. There are moments where you've just got to cover the moment. And as a younger photographer, I did that a lot, where you would turn up and not really knowing what's going on, but you would cover that news event. As you mature and you get older, you start to think about your compositional values, about the actual hurt or pain that you may be witnessing, and trying to portray that in a dignified manner. Even in the agony and ecstasy of situations, it's always good to remember that the people you are photographing are real, in the sense that they have emotions just like you. They may be affected some way from what you're photographing. And it's nice to give them some dignity, no matter how hard the subject is that you're photographing or the environment that you're working in. Always be aware of your subject, and they are people who have lives that I don't know about. I think as I've got older, I've learned to really listen, and you do take on people's pain at times. There's vicarious pain associated with working at a high level of photojournalism, and that comes with the trade.
Yes,
you have to be aware of it.
Given the sorts of work, so you talked about Fairfax News, community newspapers. Now you're with the ABC, and you're in kind of the SAS version of the ABC, special projects, so a special event.
Yeah, special reporting team, SRT, special reporting team. And I was brought on, I was hired there for about 4 years ago, with the intention of doing, quality photojournalism, quality photography. It was at a time where the ABC was transitioning into a lot more into digital, and were trying to grow their digital pages, and they needed someone to probably take the bull by the horns and lead and show the way how photographers can work, at a consistently high level, and show the way. And I've done that consistently over 4 years. I've worked at a level that I'm trained for, and it paid off this year, where I was awarded Press Photographer of the Year.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. And then you were just coming to talk about new technologies. We'll come back to that in a second. We must have a short break with some messages from our sponsors, and we'll come back to speak to Brendan Esposito. Now, you were just starting to talk about the ABC going into the digital world. And I was going to ask you, how is it different taking photos with a digital camera versus the old film? I used to enjoy playing with the aperture and the different focal
ISO.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, look, it is different. The process of photography is still the same, in the sense that, I look at things creatively, emotionally. I understand compositional values, and I understand people probably better now. So nothing has really changed, whether it's digital or film. But, film has a tactile quality about it. It's a slower paced situation. You don't have anything to look at. There's nothing on the back of the screen. So you really have to understand light. You have to understand light. And photography is painting with light. So the key, and it took me many, many years, probably from a young cadet to probably the first 15 years to actually understand light and how light works and what I needed to look for when I was doing particular photographs. Digital, everything is looked on predominantly an iPhone these days. So the compositional values are different. I have to think how people are looking at this picture, and choose lenses that will probably give me the greatest mileage for that image. I don't really compromise a great deal. I still shoot how I want to shoot and what I need to say visually. But in saying that, you don't really want to editorialize. I am the conduit. I am someone between the subject and the public. Truth and honesty is a very important thing and ethics. Yep. I hold that very dear to me in my work. So I just need to be in places and positions that I can tell the real story, tell the truth.
Yes.
But yeah, people do look at, pictures do appear differently digitally than film. I still shoot a lot of film.
Well, one thing I noticed initially many years ago, and as an amateur, was the digital photos had sharper boundaries, if that's the word you can use.
Contrast,
yeah. And so there was a different texture almost to the image compared to what you get from
there is a different texture. And cameras today are computers, and I've had cameras where the quality's been so good that you almost feel like you need to pull them back a tad because they're unreal, and it's finding that right balance to convey the truth.
Yes. And now time is running on. It's interesting. It flies when you're having an interesting conversation. Now, a question that I also asked Anthony Albanese, so I can ask you.
Yes.
With that surname, Esposito, some people probably pronounce Esposito, but Esposito. What's your Italian? Was there much Italianness in your upbringing?
Look, my grandfather, Nonno, was from Ustica. In Ustica, the island of Ustica, and then the family at some stage left and went to Naples. Then he came out to Australia and he was interned in Cowra during World War II. He was allowed to stay on in Australia, and legend has it, my mother told me that he could stay in Australia but could not become an Australian citizen for 12 years. If he kept his nose clean and did the right thing by the Australian government, they'd eventually let him become an Australian citizen.
Okay.
But my grandfather, Francesco, married Kathleen Wood, an Australian girl from Haberfield. And then they got married and had my father, Francesco Gennaro Esposito, and they would call him Reno. So I grew up with an Italian and Australian background, dominant really in, Aussie, with that Italian heritage, that connection. And my wife and I just recently went to, at the beginning of COVID, actually, we were in Italy. We went there, headed down to Sicily and tried to get onto the island, but because of COVID, we had to come home. So that's a trip that we want to go back and revisit the birthplace of my grandfather.
Okay, so how did that feel? Was that the first visit to Italy for you?
First visit, and it was quite moving for me, actually. There was some sort of connection there. I felt there was a true connection. You can't beat DNA, and I just it felt lovely. I felt at home, and I certainly want to go back. I want to go to the island of Ustica where it all began. And my grandfather, Nonno, he was brave and he came out to Australia and started a new life. And, 29 grandchildren later, great
Oh, wow.
grandchildren, and it's been a huge legacy, yeah, and we've all become Italian citizens, so it's lovely. It's wonderful.
Okay, so you hold Italian citizenship. That's a topic of discussion, debate again.
Controversy, I understand.
Italians abroad petitioning the government to change the rules. So how were you able
Is that right?
to get citizenship? Because there are quite a few
Well, I was
people,
able to get...
even people who are born in Italy now don't have citizenship because of the various changes in the laws.
That's right. From what I understand is when you came out, you had to denounce, if that's a correct word, denounce being an Italian. But because my grandfather, I'm told, was in Cowra in a prisoner of war camp, is that what internment camp? I'm sorry, yep. Internment camp. When he came out, that 12-year period that he wasn't Italian, I wasn't Australian, was still an Italian citizen living abroad effectively. That's how the Italian government saw it when I inquired about it. They said, and then he got married to an Australian girl. They had my father, Francesco Gennaro. So he was effectively born an Italian citizen in Australia, which meant that because I'm direct bloodline, and they asked that, as they said, your father, direct bloodline? I said, absolutely. And they said, well, if he's Italian, you're Italian. And it was that 12-year gap that my grandfather wasn't Australian allowed us to get our Italian citizenship.
Interesting. Interesting story. So we have to close now. We've got another guest. Interestingly, the next person is a young student of Italian at one of the local universities. And I'm guessing her surname is Baker, so I wonder what sort of Italianness is in there. So we'll see. We'll see. I'll have to ask her. Well, I will ask her. That's a standard question. But thanks for your contribution. And
great to talk to you, Antonio. Thank you so much.
Good luck for when you manage to get to Ustica.
Yes, it's coming. Trust me, it's coming.
Cool. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao.